There is always something new to learn from every project. New insights into how things are done surface all the time during the project, and those may be helpful to remember, recall, and use on future projects. These are called lessons learned in project management terminology. Hence, it is important to keep a record of these observations in the form of lessons learned from the projects you're working on, and it is for the benefit of you, other project managers, and the organization itself as a whole to benefit through a collective knowledge base that is built through this process. It is for this reason there is a process called as the manage project knowledge that is found in the executing phase of the project and sits in the integration management knowledge area. The inputs to this process are pretty much all documents that you have prepared on the project, primarily the project management plans, which describe how you are doing the project, through what methodology, what has worked, and what has not worked during the project. The inputs can also be various deliverables that are obtained due to the project effort, and also the stakeholder register to know who are the people you need to reach out to obtain the inputs. The output of this process is the lessons learned register, which is a register to track all the observations and insights obtained from the project and keeping track of where they came from. All these lessons learned are then updated and stored in the organizational process assets where they reside to be retrieved and used in subsequent projects. As you will see shortly in the closing phase, you will finalize this lessons learned register and archive it for later use. At this point, we now have the lessons learned register, which we have now started to build based on our observations and findings as we are doing the executing phase. These, as you will see, will become important to capture and record in the closing of the project. Although you'll not be doing the actual project work in terms of building the deliverables for which there are resources allocated, you will closely monitor and control the project at all times when the actual project work is ongoing. It is for this reason you have a process called Monitor and Control Project Work. In here, you will constantly check for deviations from the project management plan and ensure that the project work is on track as laid out in the management plans. You will use the collected data from the executing phase about the work performance and create reports called as the work performance reports. These are summary reports about progress of the project and an indication of the overall health of the project. These reports then could be used to communicate vital information about the project to the important stakeholders, sponsors, or customers, and inform them about if the project is on track for delivery in the promised time frame. There is one another output from this process called as change requests. As you will see in the next lectures, what happens when there are new requests of changes to the project in terms of adding additional scope that the stakeholders on the project feel necessary to be added, and those that were not initially captured in the planning phase. These could also be requests for additional time to extend the project timelines for whatever valid reasons the stakeholders feel necessary. These are called the change requests on the project that will be handled in a systematic process on the project led by the project manager as its primary driver. As you see here, the inputs for monitoring and control project work are all the project management plans, the risk register, quality metrics, which is where you can see the performance parameters that we laid out initially while planning for quality on the project. We now have the change requests in the monitoring and controlling phase that are being initiated to readjust the project in terms of the scope, schedule, or cost so that the project parameters are adjusted to the reality on ground. There is also the work performance reports being built based on the data we are collecting continuously in the executing phase. We will now be discussing an important concept in project management, which is how do we manage changes to the project which are introduced in the middle of the project. So let's first understand how are changes defined. If you recall in the discussion around scope baseline, we froze upon the scope of the project at a point in time after agreement with all the stakeholders that the scope mentioned in the scope baseline documents is the initial starting scope that the project team will work upon. So as you see here, the documents on the left are the scope baseline documents that encapsulates the 100% of scope that is expected out of the project team and the project. So the initial scope is this product that you see here that the stakeholders or the sponsors or the customer expects to see at the end of the project. However, as you see here, let's say at some point in time, a stakeholder or a group of stakeholders thought this product, which is a bicycle, could be improved by putting a GPS tracking device right into the bicycle frame so that the precise location of the bicycle could be tracked and traced through modern communication methods using the global positioning systems, satellite technologies. Now clearly, that is a change to the scope of the project that is requested in the middle of the project and that which did not exist in the scope baseline documents. Hence, a change request is defined as a formal proposal to modify any project document, deliverable, or more importantly, the baseline. Note that the baselines could be either the scope baseline or the schedule baseline, which is basically the agreed upon schedule that was communicated in the initiating phase of the project, or even the cost baseline, which is the agreed upon budget that the project will use for delivering the scope that was initially agreed upon. Note that these requests are coming in at a time way into the project execution and sometimes even at the near end of the completion of the project. Hence, it is important to have a process in place that manages these kind of changes that are introduced on the project. This is done using a dedicated process called as the Perform Integrated Change Control that rightly sits in the integration management knowledge area because it entails obtaining inputs from various places that reach out into all the other knowledge areas. The Perform Integrated Change Control process happens in the monitoring and controlling phase of the project. Hence, the inputs to this process are all the project management plans prepared so far, and primarily the scope management plan, the schedule management plan, and the cost management plan. It may also include other plans like the change management plan, etc. These are fed through this process to create one output which is called approved change requests. Notice the word approved in the deliverable from this process. Not all change requests that are run through this process are approved through the various tools and techniques that we will discuss now. Hence, the only output that comes out of this process are the approved change requests, which have been reviewed and approved by the stakeholders in this process. As you can see here, the tools and techniques used here in the integrated change control process are the expert judgment, the various change control tools that we will discuss shortly, and meetings. Controlling a project to the baselines is an essential part of project management. The change control process for the project will follow a standard process that may exist within the organization, and it is applied for all projects uniformly. The project manager has the overall responsibility for executing the change management process for each change that is requested. Now we will discuss the process of taking the various change requests that arise on the project and getting them approved at the end so that they become a part of the project and are implemented as part of the execution of the project. The first step that really happens in any change that is proposed on the project is the change request that is made by the project stakeholders. Changes can be requested by anybody on the project team, or even from the stakeholders, the sponsors, or the customer, or even the external parties that may be involved on the project. This is usually accompanied by a valid reasoning and the rationale for requesting the change. Once a change is requested by a project stakeholder, the change request needs to be formalized as a change request. In most organizations, this is done through formalized change request forms that needs to be filled out by the change requester. The form usually contains the reasoning behind why the change is being requested, the rationale behind it, and the benefit of implementing this change. The third step, it is a project manager who picks up from here where he or she registers the change in a log by filing it with other change requests that may already exist. In the next step, the project manager will conduct a preliminary analysis on the impact of the change to various parameters on the project, primarily on the scope, schedule, cost, and even the risks. If needed, the project manager then may seek clarification from the team members or the change requester. An impact analysis is done by the project manager on various project parameters, And that assessment is presented to a group of people who have authority to approve or disapprove the change. These are the people who sit on what is called as the Change Control Board, and these are the people entrusted with the authority to approve or disapprove the change request. The project manager will submit the change request as well as the preliminary analysis to the Change Control Board for review. It is here that the Change Control Board will approve or disapprove the change request based on its rationale and the benefits it may bring to the project. The Change Control Board will discuss the proposed change and decide whether or not it will be approved based on all the submitted information. In the next step, a decision is made on the submitted change request through a formal communication that the change has been approved. This means that the change can now be implemented back into the project and implemented in the product or service that is planned to be built. The last step is where the project manager will take the approved change and re-baseline the entire project. This is an important step that has to be taken up by the project manager. The project manager has the overall responsibility for executing the change management process, and it is here that the project manager will re-baseline all the elements of the project and obtain the changed parameters. As shown here, the triangle in red shows the initial project parameters in terms of the scope, schedule, and cost, whereas the outer triangle in green is the updated project parameters with the new scope, schedule, and cost that reflect the changes that have to be made on the project to accommodate the approved change. In case of the bicycle that we just discussed, the initial scope may have been these squares in red, whereas the new scope that contains the effort for fitting the new GPS device is shown here in the green square. This is an update to the WBS or the work breakdown structure, and this will be further elaborated into its individual work packages. Those work packages will then be decomposed into individual activities, and from them, the project schedule will thereby be updated. Hence, what you see here is the dashed line is the initial promised project schedule for the delivery of the project, whereas the updated project schedule is this solid line that has moved from the original timelines due to the new change that has come in. Lastly, the project budget is also updated to accommodate the cost for the additional effort in fitting the new GPS device to the bicycle. There may be updates necessary to other project documents in the areas of risks, quality, procurement, and resources as well. We now have the approved change requests that are being finalized so as to implement in the executing phase and onto which the project teams will start to work on. These requests will ultimately be implemented as part of the final product or service. We will now be discussing an essential topic in project management for the controlling of costs and the managing of budgets. Up until now, you saw how you could determine the project budget using the determine budget process in the planning phase. The project budget there was obtained through various cost estimation methods and rolling up of amounts from the individual control accounts. It is your job as a project manager to now ensure that the project is delivered in the defined budget. The way you ensure your project costs are not shooting beyond the allowable limits is through the process called control costs, which lies in the monitoring and controlling phase. As part of this process, an important concept in project management will be discussed, which is the earned value management. This is the only topic in project management where you will be required to crunch in numbers and perform some level of mathematical calculations. Before we delve into the calculations and the formulae used in earned value management, let's first now discuss the inputs, outputs, and tools and techniques of this process called as control costs. What you do here is you first take the project budget that is obtained from the planning phase as input to this process, along with the project management plan, the work performance information, and the organizational process assets. As you may recall, the project management plan contains all the necessary information about who and when will be performing individual tasks on the project. And the work performance information is a vital input to this process because it is here in the work performance information that you will know the exact status of the project in terms of what activities have been completed so far and what activities remain to be done on the project. What you get as the output of this process are the budget forecasts and other metrics pertaining to the costs and the budget of the project that are essential for you to control the various costs on the project as the project is being executed. The tools and techniques you will use in this process are the earned value management and some form of project management software, usually the predominantly used Microsoft project. Before we start to describe the various terms in earned value management, let's first revisit the project budget that was discussed in the planning phase. What we obtained from the planning phase using the determine budget process was one level of project budget obtained from rolling up estimates from individual control accounts as shown here. These are simply the cost estimates and the amounts needed to perform the individual work packages on the project and within the defined project scope. Although this number is a good indicator of how much money is needed to perform all the project work, it still does not include other components of costs that are needed to be included if you wish to obtain the true project budget. You may recall from the discussion on risk management, all projects are prone to risks sometime or the other, and by performing the risk management steps, you end up with risk responses that you will take when the risks on the project happen to occur. These risk responses have an associated cost to them and hence need to be included as part of the project budget. So what we now do is we add these costs associated to the risk responses are called as contingency reserves and are a result of the contingency planning that you do within the risk management processes. One additional component of budget that exists on projects are called as the management reserves. These are amounts or funds that are kept aside by the management or the sponsors of the project to cover for unplanned changes that may happen on the project and those that may not have been identified during the risk identification steps. These management reserves may be tapped into in the absolute worst case scenario where the project may be deficient on budget. Hence, by adding up all these three components of project budget, we now obtain a larger and overall project budget, which is the true estimate of the overall amount of money that is needed to perform the project with all the costs paid for the planned activities and also unplanned events that may happen on the project. In project management terminology, this overall project budget is called as the budget at completion or BAC. Hence what you see here is the initial project budget is the sum total of all the cost estimates obtained from the individual control accounts plus the contingency reserves and lastly the management reserves. Through the earned value management, we will now be able to determine the project health and its performance based on a few numbers that will become part of the project metrics. Let's say our project, which is the project to build the pyramids, takes 18 months to complete. This is what we obtained from the critical path calculations from the earlier lectures. Let's now say after 9 months into the project, we want to now monitor and control the project costs. As part of this process, we will also determine how is the project performing, not only in terms of the number of activities completed, but also are we doing okay with the budget. Let's now introduce a few additional concepts in earned value management. The first one is called as the plan value. At this point, after 9 months into the project, let's say, according to the project management plan and the project schedule, you are expected to finish 50% of the project work. The plan value is the cost of work that has been authorized and budgeted for a scheduled activity or WBS component in a given time frame. So let's say in our pyramids project, which is 18 months long in duration, right at the midway point of 9 months into the project, let's say that the team has been able to construct exactly 50% of the scope of the project. In other words, 50% of the project efforts have been completed. The plan value is calculated by multiplying the percentage of work completed and the BAC, which is the budget at completion. Let's say for the sake of this example, The total budget for this project is $100,000. So that means the plan value will be 50 divided by 100, which corresponds to the 50% of work completed, multiplied by the 100,000. So the resultant value, which is $50,000, is the plan value at this point in the project duration. The earned value is defined